It was 8:15 p.m. on a Friday evening in our Denver apartment. I was sitting on the living room sofa with my laptop open, adjusting the sound levels for a client's podcast episode. The apartment was quiet except for the subtle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then, Maya walked out of the hallway. She was completely dressed up for a date. Her dark hair was neatly styled. She wore a tailored jacket, and a soft scent of vanilla perfume floated into the room, immediately destroying my concentration. I knew she had plans tonight. I had known since yesterday, but I was doing my absolute best to pretend I didn't care who she was meeting. "You're wearing the expensive earrings," I noted, keeping my eyes fixed on my laptop screen. Maya paused near the kitchen island. "You noticed. You complained about the price for 3 straight weeks before buying them," I said dryly. "That isn't noticing. That's trauma." Maya didn't answer. Her phone vibrated in her palm. She looked down, read a message on the screen, and her expression went completely flat. Without saying a word, she turned her phone face down on the kitchen counter. "I'm not going out anymore," she announced softly. I carefully kept my voice neutral, suppressing the sudden, dangerous surge of relief in my chest. "Plans changed." "Something like that," she replied. She unbuttoned her jacket, draped it over the back of a dining chair, and towed her earrings. But instead of retreating to her bedroom, Maya walked straight over to the sofa. She stood right beside me, looking down at my open laptop screen. "Want to keep me company?" she asked softly. I looked up. The distance between us was less than 12 inches, close enough for me to see the quiet, unguarded flicker in her eyes. I have lived with Maya Bennett for nearly 2 years. I know how she takes her tea when she can't sleep. I know she hates it when the fridge makes a high-pitched squeak. I know she kicks her blanket off at 3 a.m. whenever she falls asleep on the couch. The only thing I had never allowed myself to know was what would happen if she actually chose me. So let me ask you a question. If the roommate you have spent 2 long years trying not to love suddenly cancels a date, sits right beside you, and asks you to keep her company, how long would you pretend it's just a normal Friday night? My name is Caleb Morgan. I am 30 years old, and I work out of our apartment as a freelance podcast editor and audio designer. I spend my days listening to human voices, smoothing out awkward silences, cutting unnecessary noise, and making sure stories sound seamless. Yet for 22 months, I pretended I couldn't hear the unspoken tension inside my own living room. Maya Bennett and I met through a mutual acquaintance when we both needed someone to split the rent on a 2-bedroom apartment in central Denver. Our initial roommate interview was strictly transactional. "Do you play the drums?" Maya had asked, folding her arms across her chest.
No, irraplia.
"Do you host loud weekend parties?"
No.
"Do you leave dirty dishes in the sink for days?" Also no. Maya smiled, a bright, dangerous spark in her eyes. "Congratulations, Caleb. You are officially ahead of 90% of the Denver housing market." We signed a 1-year lease, expecting to be nothing more than polite strangers sharing a kitchen. But within 3 months, our daily lives seamlessly intertwined. To keep things functioning smoothly, we established the official roommate rules. Rule 1. Ask before eating the other person's takeout. Rule 2. Text if you are coming home after midnight. Rule 3. Whoever cooks dinner doesn't wash the dishes. Rule 4. Give advance notice before bringing a date over. Rule 5. Never ask questions that make cohabitation awkward. Rule 5 was my favorite rule. It was my protective shield. Rule 5 allowed me not to ask why Maya had stopped going on serious dates 6 months ago. It allowed me not to ask why she always waited up for me to eat dinner together. And most importantly, Rule 5 allowed me to ignore the fact that I had started measuring my entire day by the sound of her key turning in the front door lock. Beneath my cautious boundaries lay an old, quiet scar. My parents lived together for 30 years, but their house was defined by polite, freezing silence. They stayed together for convenience, treating love like a business contract. I grew up believing that defining a relationship didn't guarantee safety. Sometimes demanding more was the exact thing that broke what was already working. Before moving in with Maya, a former relationship of mine ended when my girlfriend moved in with me, only to realize we were better apart. So, I built a personal law: never confuse comfort with love. Maya carried her own hidden weight. 2 years ago, she dated a man who constantly promised, "We'll figure it out." But whenever major career decisions arose, he put his ambitions first, expecting Maya to quietly adjust her life around him. When they broke up, he told her, "I just don't know if I can plan my life around another person." Maya didn't blame him for prioritizing his career. What hurt her was realizing she was never included in the blueprint from the start. She was easy to like in the moment but never considered for the long term. For over a year, Maya had quietly harbored feelings for me. But because I hid behind roommate courtesy, making her coffee, charging her portable batteries, saving her dinner, and calling it basic manners, she convinced herself she was reading the signals wrong. We were two people standing on opposite sides of a thin hallway, both terrified that taking one step closer would mean losing the only place that felt like home. On Friday night, after canceling her date, Maya didn't retreat to her bedroom. Instead, she walked into the kitchen, pulled 2 ceramic mugs from the cupboard, and brewed a pot of chamomile tea. She walked back into the living room, handed me a mug, and sat down on the sofa right next to me, tucking her feet beneath her sweater. "What are we watching?" she asked, grabbing the TV remote. "You hate documentary series," I reminded her, keeping my eyes fixed on my audio editing timeline. "I hate bad documentary series," Maya corrected smoothly. "That's what everyone says right before insulting my profession," I muttered. I tried to focus on my audio waveform, but the scent of her perfume and the quiet heat of her shoulder against mine made concentration impossible. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casually uninterested. "So, did your date cancel on you?" "I canceled it," Maya said, sipping her tea. I stopped moving my trackpad. I didn't look at her too fast, but I looked. Maya caught my reaction, a small, mischievous smile playing on her lips. "Wow. What?" I asked. "Nothing," she teased. "Just fascinating reflex speed." "Why did you cancel?" I asked, dropping the playful tone. Maya looked down at her tea, her thumb tracing the rim of the mug. "He texted to ask if I was still interested in going out tonight. And I realized I wasn't," she said softly. "I realized I was about to spend 3 hours across a dinner table pretending to be interested in a man I didn't care about." She turned her head to look at me, her eyes locking onto mine in the dim living room light. Maybe my standards got completely ruined. "By what?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. Maya gestured vaguely to the warm living room around us. "Domestic stability. Dangerous stuff," I cracked, trying to relieve the sudden, suffocating tension. "Apparently," she whispered. The next morning, the universe decided to test our carefully constructed boundaries. At 9 a.m. on Saturday, my main client sent an urgent email. A high-priority sound design project had been rescheduled, requiring me to spend the entire weekend editing from my home studio. A few minutes later, Maya stepped out of her room, looking at her phone with an amused expression. Her stage lighting prep for an upcoming theater show had been pushed from Saturday to Monday afternoon. For the first time in 22 months, both of us had a completely open weekend with 0 external commitments and nowhere to go. Maya leaned against the kitchen counter, taking a sip of the coffee I had left for her. "We've lived together for nearly 2 years, Caleb, and we have never actually spent an entire 72 hours in this apartment together without work or dates getting in the way. That sounds medically healthy," I noted, organizing my desk cables. "Are you scared?" she challenged, stepping closer. "Of what? You?" Maya tilted her head, her dark eyes sparkling with quiet audacity. "Of finding out you actually like having me around." I looked at her, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Maya laughed softly, turning it into a light-hearted joke, but we both knew the truth. The danger wasn't that we were stuck in the same apartment for 72 hours. The danger was that we were running out of excuses to pretend we were just roommates. By Saturday afternoon, The apartment had turned into a minefield of unacknowledged intimacy. I was sitting at my desk near the living room window, wearing my headphones around my neck. Maya walked out of her room carrying a stack of old files and sat down on the floor near the coffee table to organize her stage lighting schematics. "You're making it really difficult for future men, you know?" Maya suddenly remarked, holding a sheet of paper up to the light. I didn't look up from my screen. "Future men. Men. In the future," she repeated casually. "The ones I'm supposed to date." "I understood the grammar, Maya," I said dryly. "Your logic is what's confusing. You made fresh coffee before I even woke up," she pointed out, gesturing toward her mug. "Most guys don't even remember to text back within 4 hours. They can learn how to make coffee," I replied. "You think it's about the coffee, Caleb?" she asked softly. I kept my eyes fixed on my computer monitor, refusing to take the bait. A few minutes later, Maya stood up and walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. I stood up at the same time to grab a fresh notebook from the overhead cabinet above the counter. We met in the narrow space between the island and the refrigerator. As I reached up to open the cabinet door, my arm brushed against hers. My fingers touched her wrist. Neither of us pulled away. For 3 long seconds, the kitchen went completely silent save for the quiet hum of the fridge. Maya looked down at our touching hands, then looked up into my eyes. "Roommate maintenance?" she murmured, throwing my own phrase back at me. "Occupational hazard," I corrected, my voice raspy. "You edit audio, Caleb. You don't work in a kitchen." I slowly pulled my hand back, clearing my throat and opening the cabinet. It's a narrow kitchen. Later that afternoon, Maya decided we needed to deep clean the hall closet. While pulling out old winter coats, she uncovered a small cardboard memory box we had used during our first month of living together. Inside was an old, yellowed sticky note she had slapped onto the refrigerator 19 months ago. It read, "Don't eat the leftover pasta. Or do. I'm not your mother." Maya picked up the note, staring at it in disbelief. "Why do you still have this?" "It was funny," I defended, grabbing a stack of empty boxes. "It's a grocery note from a year and a half ago, Caleb," she pointed out, her eyes softening. "It's a historically significant grocery note," I insisted. "It marked the day you realized I don't listen to instructions." Maya looked at the note, then looked at me. The sarcasm vanished from her expression, replaced by a quiet, searching warmth. She realized I hadn't just saved a note. I had preserved a tiny piece of our shared history. To break the rising emotional weight, I quickly cleared my throat and moved toward the living room. During lunch, as we sat across from each other eating sandwiches at the kitchen island, I finally asked the question that had been hovering in my mind all morning. "So, what was actually wrong with the guy from last night?" Maya set her sandwich down. "Nothing. He was nice. He has a stable job, he likes dogs, and he brought me flowers on our first date." "Then why cancel?" I asked. Maya rested her chin in her hands, looking directly into my eyes. "Maybe I didn't want to spend 3 hours comparing him to someone else." My hand froze around my soda can. I squeezed the aluminum slightly, the metal crinkling beneath my fingers. "Someone else. Hypothetically," she added smoothly. "That didn't sound hypothetical, Maya." "Neither did your jealousy," she countered. "I'm not jealous," I stated firmly, keeping my tone perfectly level. "Sure," Maya smiled, watching my white-knuckled grip on the soda can. "And you're squeezing that aluminum can because you love recycling." I set the can down immediately, but the damage was done. We both knew I was lying. By Saturday evening, Maya found an old board game trivia deck in the hallway cabinet and insisted we play a round of Who Knows Who Better? "This is how roommates ruin friendships," I warned, sitting on the sofa. "We're not just roommates, Caleb. We're professional cohabitants," she corrected, shuffling the cards. We started with easy questions. Favorite comfort foods, worst habits, preferred music genres. I answered every single question about her correctly without hesitation. Maya pulled a card from the middle of the deck, reading the prompt out loud. What is your roommate's ultimate comfort food? Tomato soup and grilled cheese, I answered instantly. But only when you're overwhelmed or had a terrible day at work. Maya paused, looking up from the card. That second part wasn't on the prompt. I realized I had overshared, revealing just how closely I had been watching her for 22 months. She drew another card. Her expression shifted slightly as she read the text. What makes you feel most at home? I opened my mouth to offer a quick, sarcastic joke about fast Wi-Fi and quiet neighbors. But as I looked at Maya sitting across from me in her oversized sweater, the joke died in my throat. My eyes lingered on her face, completely unguarded for a fraction of a second. Maya caught the look. The humor drained from her eyes, replaced by a sudden, breathtaking intensity. That was subtle, she whispered. I was looking at the floor lamp behind you, I lied weakly. I am sitting directly in front of the lamp, Caleb. Exactly, I muttered. Maya let out a soft laugh, but it faded quickly. Later that night, around 11 p.m., we were watching a movie on the sofa. Halfway through the film, Maya's head drooped, and she drifted off to sleep, her head coming to rest softly against my right shoulder. I froze. I didn't move an inch for nearly an hour, enduring a completely numb arm just to keep from waking her up. When the movie credits began to roll, Maya shifted, slowly opening her eyes. She realized she was leaning heavily against me, but she didn't jump back. She stayed right there, her breath warm against my neck. You could have moved me, she murmured softly into the dark room. You were asleep, I replied quietly. That isn't a reason, Caleb. Apparently it was. She slowly sat up, resting her elbows on her knees and looking at the dark TV screen. Do you ever think we're really bad at being roommates? We haven't killed each other yet, I offered, trying to deflect. That's not what I meant, she whispered. I knew exactly what she meant, but fear pulled me back into my safe shell. Then I don't know what you mean, Maya. Maya stood up from the sofa, looking down at me with deep disappointment. Yeah, you do. She walked into the kitchen to make a final cup of tea before bed. I followed her a moment later, standing near the doorway. Maya sat on the kitchen counter, holding her mug with both hands. She looked up at me through the dim kitchen light. If I moved out, Caleb, would you miss me? I tried to laugh it off. Who would forget to buy paper towels every 3 weeks? Caleb, she said, her voice dropping all traces of humor. Answer me properly. I swallowed hard, stepping closer to the counter. Of course I'd miss you, Maya. How much? She pushed quietly. Enough to finally get total control over the apartment thermostat. I cracked gently. Maya let out a small, sad smile and looked down at her tea. Right? Of course. She hopped off the counter and walked past me toward her bedroom, closing her door with a soft, decisive click. I stood alone in the dark kitchen, realizing with a crushing weight that I had just let another vital door slam shut right in front of my face. On Sunday morning, the atmosphere in the apartment was heavy, filled with an uncomfortable, careful politeness. At 10:30 a.m., Maya's phone rang in the living room. She stepped into her bedroom to take the call, closing the door behind her. I sat at the kitchen island, pretending to review audio tracks, but my mind was completely consumed by the quiet tone of her voice behind the closed door. 10 minutes later, the bedroom door opened. Maya walked out, her face pale, her hands holding her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. I stood up immediately. Is everything okay? Yeah, she said softly, but she didn't sit down. She stood near the living room rug, staring at the floor. Maya, what happened? I asked, walking over to her. She took a slow, shaky breath. That was the lead producer from a major stage production company in Seattle. They just officially offered me the senior lighting director position. My heart plummeted straight into my stomach. Seattle. It's a 10-month master contract, she explained, her voice flat and guarded. It starts in 6 weeks. It's the exact project type I've been trying to get into for 3 years. I stood frozen in the middle of the room. How long have you known about this? That it was a possibility? 3 weeks, she admitted. The words felt like a physical slap to my chest. 3 weeks? You've known for 3 weeks and you didn't say a single word to me? Maya looked up, anger flashing in her dark eyes. Why would I tell you, Caleb? I didn't even know if I was going to get the job. Because we live together. I snapped, my calm exterior completely fracturing. Because I thought we communicated. You could have told me you were considering leaving Denver. Why? Maya yelled back, stepping toward me. So you could give me another one of your polite, detached roommate speeches. You're my roommate, right, Caleb? The word roommate sliced straight through my chest. It was the exact label I had used for 22 months to protect myself, and now she was throwing it back in my face like a weapon. Don't do that, Maya, I shouted, breaking my usual quiet composure. Don't pretend that's all this has been. Then tell me what it is, she demanded, tears glistening in her eyes under the morning light. Because I am exhausted, Caleb. I am exhausted from playing this stupid game. You cook dinner when I'm late. You know when I'm lying about being okay. You saved a stupid sticky note I wrote 19 months ago. You look at every single man I attempt to date like he's taking something that belongs to you in this apartment. You don't belong to me, Maya, I yelled. I know, she cried out, her voice trembling with emotion. That's why I need you to stop acting like I do, unless you are actually willing to say what you want. The living room went intensely, suffocatingly quiet. I covered my face with my hands, taking a deep, ragged breath before dropping them to my sides. I am terrified, Maya, I confessed, my voice breaking in the quiet room. I am terrified of ruining this. My parents lived in a house full of silent resentment. My ex walked out the second we moved in together. This apartment, this space with you, is the first place in my entire life that actually feels safe. Maya looked at me, a tear slipping down her cheek. Caleb, the apartment isn't what makes it feel safe. What are you talking about? I asked softly. Maya took a step closer, looking up into my eyes with raw, devastating honesty. You keep calling this an apartment because you're scared to admit it became a home. The sentence struck me so hard I couldn't speak. And homes involve people, Caleb? She whispered, her voice shaking. Which means, yes, sometimes you risk losing them. But staying safe in this living room is slowly killing both of us. I looked into her tear-streaked face. Every self-imposed rule, every defense mechanism, and every fear collapsing into dust. I don't want you to move to Seattle, I admitted, the truth finally tearing free from my chest. Maya stayed silent, watching me closely. That's not enough, Caleb. I don't want to watch you date other men, I continued, taking a step toward her. I don't want to pretend I'm just making coffee out of roommate courtesy. Still not enough, she whispered, her hands shaking. I reached out, placing my hands gently on her waist, pulling her into my space. I am in love with you, Maya. The words hung in the air, simple, unfiltered, and absolute. Maya's breath hitched. Since when? I don't know, I whispered, resting my thumb against her jawline. Liar, she choked out through a soft sob. Fine, since the Christmas you fell asleep on the kitchen floor waiting for the cookies to bake. That was 14 months ago, Caleb, she whispered, a tearful laugh escaping her lips. I know, I murmured. I looked at her lips, then looked back into her eyes. Can I kiss you? Maya let out a breathy laugh, wrapping her arms around my neck. You are about a year late, Morgan. I leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a sudden, chaotic explosion. It was deep, warm, and reverent, erasing 22 months of hesitation, hidden glances, and unspoken words. When we finally separated, resting our foreheads together, Maya let out a shaky breath. You realize Seattle still exists, right? She whispered against my lips. And just like that, our breakthrough moment crashed straight into our reality. The Seattle offer email was sitting on Maya's phone, requiring a formal response by 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning. It was currently Sunday evening. We had exactly 36 hours to make a decision. If she accepted, She would move to Washington in 6 weeks for a 10-month residency that had a strong possibility of turning into a permanent role. My immediate, conditioned reflex flared up, the self-sacrificing habit I had relied on my entire adult life. "It's an incredible opportunity for your career, Maya," I said, sitting beside her at the kitchen island. "You should take it." Maya set her mug down, the warmth in her eyes instantly flattening into deep disappointment. "There it is." "What?" I asked, confused. "You're doing it again," she said firmly, pulling her hands back. "You're deciding what I should do, so you don't have to take the risk of telling me what you actually want." "Maya, I'm not going to ask you to give up your career for me," I argued. "I didn't ask you to ask me that," she countered, her voice rising. "Stop saying go like it makes you noble." My ex did the exact same thing. He made executive decisions about our future and expected me to fit around his blueprint. I am tired of men treating my ambition like an obstacle to be managed. Her words sliced straight through my defenses because she was completely right. I was trying to play the martyr so I wouldn't have to face the terrifying vulnerability of asking her to stay. "I want you to take the job, Maya," I stated clearly, locking my eyes onto hers. "And I want us. I am done pretending those two things can't exist in the same universe." Maya stared at me, her expression softening as the anger drained away. "So what do? We stop making executive decisions for each other," I said firmly. "We make a plan together." That night, we sat side by side at the dining table with our laptops open, building a practical, real-world strategy instead of surrendering to fear. Denver to Seattle was a short, 2.5-hour flight. As a freelance audio engineer, 80% of my mixing and sound design work was location independent. I opened my client schedule and mapped out a concrete routine. I could consolidate my local Denver recording studio sessions into tight 2-week blocks, allowing me to work remotely from Seattle for 10 days out of every month. Meanwhile, Maya reviewed her project contract. Her stage design schedule included mandatory dark weeks between major theater runs. We scheduled concrete visit dates, mapped out shared travel expenses, and established a firm rule. We would have video calls 3 nights a week, not to analyze our relationship, but simply to share our ordinary days. Minimum 2 weekends a month in the same city, Maya stipulated, pointing at the digital calendar. 3, I corrected smoothly. "I'm making up for 14 months of wasted time." "Fair point," she smiled. Then came the question of our Denver apartment. Our lease was up in 3 months. "What do we do with this place?" Maya asked quietly, gesturing around the living room. I looked at the kitchen where we had argued, the sofa where she had fallen asleep, and the hallway where we had dodged our feelings for 2 years. "We keep it until the lease ends," I decided. "And after 3 months of long distance, we evaluate everything honestly. If Seattle is where your career needs to be permanently, we look at moving my permanent setup there."
No martyrs. No hidden resentments.
Maya looked at me, a profound sense of relief washing over her face. "You're actually building a plan with me." "I told you," I said, taking her hand across the table. "I'm done being a coward." At 8:15 a.m. on Monday morning, 24 hours before her deadline, Maya sat at the kitchen counter with her cursor hovering over the Seattle offer email. She turned to look at me, a familiar, playful spark returning to her eyes. "Still want to keep me company?" I wrapped my arms around her waist from behind, resting my chin on her shoulder. "Apparently for the foreseeable future." Maya smiled and clicked accept offer. 11 months later, the Seattle residency came to a triumphant close. Those 10 months of long distance were far from a movie montage. Long-distance relationships are relentlessly unglamorous. There were delayed flights, 3-hour time differences during her touring weeks, dropped video calls, and days when Maya was too exhausted after lighting setups to do anything more than text, "I love you," before falling asleep. We had real arguments, like when I fell back into my old habit of saying, "I'm fine" over text instead of admitting I missed her. But this time, neither of us ran away. Whenever fear crept in, we picked up the phone and spoke the raw, uncomfortable truth until the noise cleared. I flew to Seattle twice a month, editing podcast tracks from her living room desk. Maya flew back to Denver during her dark weeks. We didn't sacrifice our careers for love. We built a schedule large enough to hold both. When her contract ended, Maya accepted a permanent hybrid role with a national theatrical design firm, allowing her to establish her primary studio right here in the West. Together, we packed up our old 2-bedroom Denver apartment and moved into a new, sunlit loft space in Seattle. On our first night in the new apartment, the space was a chaotic sea of cardboard boxes. The TV wasn't hooked up, the Wi-Fi wasn't installed, and our new sofa had just been delivered to the center of the room. Maya sat down on the sofa, pulling her knees up to her chest, looking around at the unpacked room. "We don't even have Wi-Fi yet," she noted with a soft laugh. "Tragic?" I smiled, sitting down right beside her and pulling her into my arms. "Nothing to watch, nowhere to go," she murmured, looking up into my eyes with that exact same look from a year ago. "Want to keep me company?" she whispered. I looked at the woman who had transformed my entire understanding of safety, home, and love. "I was planning on it," I replied softly. "Just for tonight?" she teased. I leaned down and kissed her. Longer. Looking back over those 2 years, I realized that what almost cost me the love of my life wasn't the fear of losing an apartment. It was the belief that staying safe behind self-imposed rules was better than risking everything to build a real future. Love doesn't mean staying safe behind quiet boundaries. Mature love is about building a space strong enough to hold both people's dreams, making a plan together, and choosing each other every single day. If you realize that you were falling for your roommate, the person who already felt like home, would you take the risk and speak the truth? Or would you stay silent to keep things safe? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.